All right, guys, welcome to the channel. We're kicking this off for what you guys selected as Point of Impact. So we're looking at reaching out. We're going to be sitting down and interviewing different people from the law enforcement side, training, industry, the media influencers. So pretty much whatever we think might be of interest to you guys from those points of view, we're going to be trying to sit down and focus and chat with them. But kicking off, we're going to be bouncing between Chris and myself as far as a little bit about us, a little bit more about the company, what you guys may not know. So
that's a really, really scary thought, digging into these deep, dark secrets. So.
Well, it's also a matter of how far down the history do we want to go on that. So I guess kicking off, you've been with the company longer than I have. And so back in the day, it wasn't a gear company. Walk us how we got here.
So we definitely heard about FBI, HRT, and we said, I'm just kidding, we didn't do that. No, so the way that the company more or less got started was certain capabilities were really starting to be learned, more so about close quarters battle, less than lethal type components. Some of those things were available to the civilian market, but a lot of the stuff that was happening prior to, say, 2010, 2011, I was not personally involved in. Like, I've known James since probably 2005, but that was through other type of socialization components. Believe it or not, you've actually met James in 2006.
We were chatting about that, and I honestly don't even remember that. I mean, I remember the event, I remember what we were doing, but...
Yeah, it's a long time ago. We won't talk about that. That's dark, ancient history. But yeah, 2010, it'd been a really long time, and I was kind of driving down where they were basically practicing, and they were like, hey, you want to come out shoot a little bit while you're waiting? So I kind of went out, did a little bit of shooting with the staff that was currently available, and then they were like, hey, we kind of know that you have these backgrounds and stuff, would you want to come on and kind of help out with some of the training side? So I agreed, and I mostly concentrated on carbine, pistol. And then 2012, kind of just wanted to take a vacation. So changed up jobs and went to Afghanistan on and off for about 2 years. Got back, reached out, and the company was still doing the training side, but there was a lot of other components that they were trying to move their fingers into. We went back more towards a training style company. The business was doing okay. We then eventually expanded and kind of had some good instructors on, but just like every company, you only have so much time unless you can bring in new knowledge. So the company kind of stopped on the training side and realized that we weren't being challenged enough for the training side, so we needed a bigger challenge, which was to be introduced into a community that was already somewhat saturated. So we said, hey, let's build plate carriers.
Yeah, I've heard, this was all before my time here, but the training company, and then it morphed into the gear. Was it from not realizing, or realizing that there were failures in the gear on the market, or was it just this is something we want to do?
Well, it was more so just different ideas. Certain kit did really well, but you started to actually dissect some of the kit, and you started to realize some of it was still useful, but it wasn't as modernized as the kind of path, the way that it's going now. Like now we look at tactical gear, you're starting to see Tegris is becoming the norm. Mm-hmm. That was not the case 2021. You look at the way that placards are pretty much the norm, right? Back in 2018.
Well, it's the norm for those that can choose to buy their own gear. The stuff that's issued is
true,
still
but placards were
old.
Not the norm.
Yeah.
And eventually we were like, hey, look, let's go back to the drawing board, make as much of a modernized component at that time. And I mean, you know, we've had these meetings before. We even discuss ways that we can modernize the kit that we're using now. But a lot of it really came down to, what is it that we dislike about the most commonly used kit at the time, and how do you make it better? The belt was, how do you build a rigid system that is super light but yet rigid, that doesn't feel like a battle belt that hangs 5 or 6 inches off the side of your body? So those components.
The whole area that the industry has taken with the belt is, I think, phenomenal. I remember when it was just that super thick padded battle belt that if you didn't cinch the hell out of it and you tried to move, it's just shaking everywhere and you're getting rubbed and just...
I think there's a place for it in certain people's minds, but I think that as technology has gotten better, people have kind of looked at it and said, there's so many different environmental components that make this good, but there's also the factor that the moment it gets wet, it's going to weigh about 3 times more than it actually should. And then you get into, like you said, it's going to start sagging. So at what point do you start saying, hey, look, buy once, cry once, get something more modern, get something a little bit better? Sure, there's things I think we can do better in-house, but sometimes it's based on those customer feedbacks. And I think for me, working on the branding side, I tell everybody that I have ever worked with, hey, look, we're really thick-skinned. You're not going to hurt our feelings. Tell us the truth, or else we can't really build a better product. Like, we can run this all we want. We can come up internally with ideas. But if we, like you were saying when you were discussing this with Jason the other day, if we do not have external feedback, we can get into groupthink, and groupthink is very destructive because you're in a bubble and you may not be hearing what a larger demographic customer base may be wanting. Now, sometimes the ideas are not good, but then there are other times where it's like, that actually is something we never even pondered because we never really did those mission sets. I wonder if this is going to be some kind of expansive capability that's going to eventually start to become the norm. So.
That is one thing, you know, the tagline for the company, a mission adaptable gear. There's ways to use the gear that we never thought of when we, you know, designed something. And it's been neat to hear that feedback from customers and go, yeah, I took this piece and, you know, I leveraged your different piece over here, completely using it in a way that we never intended. But until you see comments or you get feedback or emails from customers, we never know those things.
Well, let's touch back a little bit. So we've actually been more associated for a longer period of time than we ever thought as a whole within a company. So you came into HRT, what, 2019, right?
Oh, I'm not even
2020, actually.
Somewhere
2020, I
around
think,
there.
because I was like, hey,
and
if I let you come to the range and shoot, would you be willing to do some modeling for us?
It was the need for media. It was needing somebody that, you know, you hand them a firearm. They're safe with it,
right?
But they know what they're doing with it. They're not going to, you know. We needed somebody. I say we at the time.
We needed you at the time because you worked for free.
Yeah, back then. But then it grew from there, and honestly, the values of the company and where the company's trying to go. So I never left. You guys haven't gotten rid of me yet, so.
Well, I keep trying to get fired, but I keep getting told I do a good enough job that I can't be let go.
We're not
I
replacing
turn in
you.
my resignation like every 2 weeks, and it gets torn and thrown in the trash. I really got to work on a better resignation letter, I guess.
Yeah.
But
so we've both been with the company for a while. Let's walk down some of the favorite kit and so forth. But first, I know you deployed. I know you were a Marine, and so therefore, I brought the Air Force flask just to make you enjoy it.
I have a better flask, and it even has a shot glass in the middle, so that way you can share.
Yeah, you beat me on that one, but I brought something for you. For those that care, and let's face it, guns and bourbon go together pretty well, not always at the same time, but Four Roses, small batch. All right, favorite gear. What is it that you like about it, how you use it?
So if I were going to be busting down doors every single day, I'd take an LBAC. just simply for the fact that you can add in the side plate armor. However, if I'm looking at worst case scenario, I'll be honest, more streamlined. I think the HRAC is more of what I'm looking for, but only for the reason, you always hear about people talking about the Civil War is right around the corner, all this kind of crazy talk. And the reason I say that is because if you literally walk out the door and you go talk to your neighbor, are you guys constantly fighting? No, not really. You
Right.
probably get along pretty well with most of your neighbors. So I don't
Or
think,
tolerate them at least.
yeah, at least tolerate him and say, hey, live and let live. But my biggest fear would be more so of just urban fallout. And since I do kind of live just on the outskirts of an urban area, more in the suburbs, for me, an HRAC, it's quick to put on.
Yeah.
QD cummerbunds, it just makes everything really simple to take off. The other thing that I probably have as my main setup is a AAA-R placard, but the reason why I run a AAA-R is because I want as thin as possible on the front. And to kind of give that admin component, I'll usually run a dangler, the sporran
You love that
pouch.
sporran. Which cracks me up because it just always annoys the fire out of me every time I go to move and it's just bouncing around. But I do agree with you on when I first got to the company and started, all right, access to better gear than I'd been using previously. HRAC was my go-to. I wanted
Well,
the
that
low
was our first
profile.
kit.
I wanted, well, the rack was there, but it didn't interest me at the time.
Well, the HRAC was the first one that we brought to market. The rack came about 10 months later, and that was right before SHOT in 2020, and I think that's your first SHOT show was in 2020. But the idea was there, increasing back panel
Yep.
options, capabilities, making quick on, quick off, and it was
So you mentioned that
more of that modernization process of taking that HRAC and then expanding it. And that was also when we started to expand cummerbund options. That's when we started to,
the 3-band
the
came along at that
Maximus
point.
really started to take hold as far as becoming its own product. I think that was our first problem child that we really had at the beginning, which was how to build a multi-caliber option that wasn't just the same thing that everybody else was doing. Because most everybody else, it was just a single pouch on the outside plus inserts. So the dual pouch system, it's a really great idea, and it was a definite kind of transition. So.
Yeah, the Maximus is our number one. It's just kind of funny that it's not the one you like.
No, I do not dislike it.
It's not your go-to. That's
So
probably
if I look at it from my experiences, it's up, or it's I'm up, they see me, I'm down. So that's like 3 seconds. It's basically, this was everything, hey, new wars are all going to be fought based off of what we learned in Vietnam. Well, guess what? Then you had Somalia, and then it was like, oh, well, maybe we need to move to more of an urbanized capability. Then in 1995, 1996, every military unit was kind of introducing mount at basically conventional all the way to the SOCOM level. So there had to be some competency in urban environments. And then by 1998, a lot of the test bed components started to really get the data that they were looking for. It may not have been the data they wanted, but it was data that they could actually use and say, hey, here are kind of some of the issues and the problems that we're having. One, the gear is outdated. We need better body armor. Number two, we need something that isn't going to be just a bunch of suspenders. We need a single system, and that's kind of where plate carriers really started to take place. And then in 2001, everybody from the Army to the Marines, everybody really started to transition a lot of their gear. And then after Afghanistan, it was kind of a free fall because there was just so many demands, but nobody making it. Like you had Black Hawk, I think Eagle Industries was kind of still in the game. You had Tactical Taylor, because I remember at Camp Pendleton, if you needed kit, You didn't go to the PX, you didn't go to cash sales, you didn't go anywhere. You went down the street out off base to a place called Tactical Tailor. And I'm serious, that's where you got your kit. And then there was like a few other small tailor shops around there that was starting to do new stuff. And you would have like the SEALs coming from San Diego and Coronado that would be driving up, and then they would be like, hey, here's what we need. Here's what we're doing. We're working in high altitude. We don't need plate carriers. We need a chest rig with these types of things. So then you started seeing those in their shops. And then what they would do is they would be like, hey, let me take a look at that. Can you make this with this? And they were kind of doing like onesies and twosies based on what you would want. Now you would pay for it. Like if you wanted extra stuff, they would do it. But now it's like everybody has kind of gone back to what was happening in the 1990s, where you still get an adaptable system, but there's certain things that you can and cannot change. And for me, that's what I love about the modulus, because I may not need to run front pouches, but I need a multi-caliber system, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas the Maximus, you set it up, it's got everything. For like law enforcement, your average civilian, that's perfect. But the moment you start getting into like sniper operations, well, you may not need to carry that much on your front. You may need a bigger backpack, and you just need something you can take out and go. If you're like let's say a TAC P, or you work with Anglico, or you're with like a combat control team, if you're working in higher altitudes and your job is basically just to call in fire missions all day, you may not need that body armor, because concealment may be what's really needed more than anything. So something smaller but robust is a better way to go.
The chest harness one's interesting because and I've still got one of the prototypes of one of the early chest rigs that we did. There's been an evolution there as far as not just how our placards interface with the chest rig, but we've got new versions coming out for what we're doing with the chest rigs. Now we're looking at, in the future, hopefully incorporating some of the rear panels to give you, access to what you need on the front, but then also on the back in kind of a pack scenario, but not having armor. Yeah. And so from HRT standpoint, responding to those needs and having a piece of gear that is adaptable to whatever scenario they may need.
Well, I mean, and that's another thing that's kind of a strong point, being a smaller company. You don't
that flexibility,
yeah, you don't have to go to the board and say, we need this much money. You can literally just have whoever your design team show up, and then you can say, hey, look, here's some of the feedback that we've been getting from these groups, whether it's law enforcement or stuff from like a military unit. And then they come back and they say, hey, look, this is really good, but this is something that we could also use in conjunction with it. And I think that's why, if you look at our design board, that's why we've got new things. Hopefully they can be out by right around the time SHOT is going 2025, because I think that is some really good ideas. I wish we could talk more about those.
You brought up earlier in the podcast, we just kind of concluded with inline defense. And the question was asked, if you guys have the lifetime warranty, if you guys are backing your product for so long, how do you keep succeeding? And you just hit it. It's that new product. It is the innovation.
Well, here's something
here's
something I've started to see. Every single time you have a conflict, gear, tactics, they all kind of change a little bit. And then all of a sudden it starts to make this arc. And then you get to about 180 degrees from what you were doing. So if you look at Iraq, it was primarily an urban war. Mm-hmm. You get to Afghanistan, it was mostly a rural war with a few towns or small cities that you might pass through. You get to Vietnam, it was basically some urban battles, but it was predominantly mostly jungle warfare, or depending on who you talk to, it could just be completely nothing at all, just because of like Agent Orange, Agent Blue, and all those things. And it would just completely knock out the whole entire jungle component. So it would be more like a Savannah type thing. Then you can go back to the Rhodesian War. Like the Rhodesian War was kind of a hodgepodge mix of different stuff. but the gear that they had a major impact on gear that's still being built today.
Wasn't there one that you absolutely love? One of the
Oh, I love the South African
Yeah.
or the Rhodesian rigs. And there's a reason why they're still in demand today. It's because they had a multitude of pockets they could implement into either a chest rig, or they could kind of build into an LBE option. And then it came with a backpack. It's funny that you bring it up, because now certain trends are leading to going back to that. So we're kind of getting to that 360 cycle where plate carriers are still in demand, but there's also those like kind of side things. Like I remember when I first showed up in certain parts of Afghanistan, like you saw guys basically still going back to kind of like a more open LBV type style design, where it was pretty
no
much,
armor
it was
at
just a
all.
belt, suspenders, and then it kind of had like a chest rig kind of component to it. But it was all about being light, but being able to carry as much ammo, food and water, but then you put your pack on and you've got that much more capability that you can take to the fight. So you just saw different types of stuff depending on the operations that people were working in. So it was a interesting time, and it was definitely something that I will say I had an absolute blast. But yeah, I think what you're going to start to eventually see is things is going to start, you're going to see this 360 pattern, and you're already kind of seeing it. But if you go back to World War II, basically a suspender-based design was what the U.S. military was using up until 2002. Like guys I deployed with into Iraq were still wearing like the Y or the H suspenders over top of basically ballistic armor. Now they were like old, senior, crusty guys that were doing more command level stuff.
I don't want to change.
But you know, they were like, I mean, that's what they said. It's like, hey, I've been running this for near 20
Right.
years. I'm not going to change now. But then you have younger generations that kind of come in and they're like, no, our mission sets are changing. We want lighter gear. We want something more efficient.
So you've deployed, you've dealt with some of the gear and how it's transitioned over the years. I've not deployed. My military time was all stateside, and you know the pieces that we were supporting downrange. I know what we did and how impactful it was, but it was not something that I ever went overseas and did. All of the gear use here for me has been playing in some of the tactical competitions and that type of the side of things, and it's been interesting to watch. You harped on a lot of the transition to the recce style setup, a lot more of the lighter weight, move fast type of kit. We've seen a lot of that really getting used in some of the competition side for some of the run and guns for tactical games. We've seen chest rigs there getting used quite often. And so it's neat for me from you know, not ever having gone through the deployments or anything, but watching it's back and forth, the evolution between competition to the military, because competition is what started the dual optics on the rifles, the offsets. Well, now that's kind of more of a standard thing with the military as well. But then we're seeing competitions that are taking on more of the military flavor, whether it's the folks, I'm out of the military, but I still enjoyed that adrenaline. I still enjoyed training and being proficient with my gear and my kit. I can do this from a stateside competition level.
Well, look at it like this. If you've ever had the chance to listen to either Larry Vickers, Kyle Lamb, they were probably two of the most important people that have touched the civilian side as far as opening up about certain things that they've done. But when you actually listen to them, they did competition shooting before competition was really a big thing. So they would have, you know, different things because they realized that gunfighting is being able to hit your target faster than your target can hit you and being accurate throughout that. Well, back then, one of the best ways to do that was to put yourself under a timer to basically get accurate hits on targets. And if you ever get a chance to go in and listen to them, I think about 3, maybe 4 years ago, the two of them actually sat down and had a conversation. I found it was just mind-blowing, some of the stuff that they were talking about, because a large portion of what they talked about was actually just competition shooting. because that had a huge influence. And then both of them were in Somalia in '93, and they actually started to see like some of the things that others were capable of doing, and then certain others that were not. And then they started to change some of the shooting packages that they were doing in the build-up process to go to that specific unit. So that had a pretty big impact. But back to what you were saying about competition shooting have an impact on tactical operations, pistol red dots right there. Yeah, that
Which
started in the competition world. But it's a great proving grounds for new kit, because if you're shooting competition, no one's shooting back at you, and you can test the gear, you can look at longevity, durability. Same thing with
I'm okay with nobody shooting back at me when I'm at matches.
Well, same thing with like tactical games, proving grounds, running guns like the Guardian and the Legion. Those are great places to test gear. They're going to get muddy. They're going to get wet. They're going to basically have to hold up under duress, and that's a great place for them to do it. Like, we've done Guardian together. I never run Guardian to win. I always run Guardian for fun, and I've never had an issue. And there's something that we ran as a prototype at that event that I really wish we could have brought to the market. But, you know, that was...
The first time that you came to Guardian, we had several pieces of gear there cutting its teeth.
Yeah, that was when the chest rig was really trying to come out on its own, when we had the first suspender set, but I picked up the old prototype one, so when I put it on, it was size for a giant, and I couldn't size it down small enough.
You mean Shrek size doesn't fit you?
Yeah, it was Shrek size didn't fit me. But it was also an opportunity for us to kind of test other gear. So.
It was one of the first ones where we actually took our mag pouches when they were still a prototype, and the mag pouches that went to that event have gone to, I think.
Well, I'm talking about the year before, when it was not at the Elk Creek, but the one before that, 2 years before.
Oh, okay.
So that one was when we just came to market with the original chest rig. And I grabbed one of the older ones, not realizing I grabbed the wrong one, thinking this would be a good opportunity to kind of run this, get some feedback, look for...
Oops.
Yeah, I picked up the wrong one. It completely did not work, and had to run everything in a backpack, so...
Well, what I was saying with the belt and the mag pouches, some of the first prototypes that we designed cut its teeth at Guardian, and it's continued to be used at matches, you know, from one of the guys that was testing them. To this day, it's one of the most beat up pairs of mag pouches I have seen.
But they're holding.
They're holding.
Yeah.
Not a single problem. It's not lost any of the retention for the pieces, for the magazines. It's still rock solid on the arc belt. And he's like, I love this kit. Why would I ever need to replace this?
Well, that's also kind of one of the other points is, yeah, those are great places for testing duration tests, not duration, but durability tests. Looking at ways that you can find sore spots within the kit, like where's going to be your rub spots.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want is, in a real world situation, you're going to be doing like a 26-mile movement on foot, and by the time you get there, your hips are completely bloody because your kit is just constantly rubbing.
You got that rub point, yeah.
Yeah.
Hot spots.
So finding comfort, durability, rigidity in the right places, I mean, that's an art form. Like, people never really think about the design components that come with it. And there are, like we were talking about before, there's certain kit that works great in an urban environment, but the moment you get it into a mountainous terrain, or you get it into like a tropical environment, it just doesn't really do that well. So one, you got to deal with the environment. So if in a tropical environment, it's going to be super hot, so you want to be able to breathe. So chest rigs, depending on where you're at, may be your better option, especially if you're doing something like ambush operations. How do you incorporate consistently wearing body armor when that's just going to slow you down if all you're doing is just harassing? Speed is your best ally at that point. So Yeah, I mean, and I think that's one thing that the company is doing really well right now, is looking at different mission sets. And yeah, I'm really excited looking at the possibility of coming out with an X harness over the H harness. Like for me, on my body style, the normal chest rig works completely fine because I actually have shoulders. Whereas if you are a slightly more dainty or more, I don't want to use anything like derogatory.
Appreciate it. Dainty. You already said dainty.
Okay, so
Yeah,
if
the H harness and I
you're a
struggle.
micro person,
The H harness and I struggle. I
you're
know.
not as dense, then yeah, the X harness is a better option.
Yeah. So we've chatted through some of the gear, we've chatted through the kit, a little bit of history. Weapon-wise, go-to, what's your favorite? What's in the current arsenal that would you say is your favorite?
You know, I
Favorite
can't
weapon?
answer that.
Really?
Can't. Because I've got 2 new toys and I've only had a limited amount of time to play with them. And I haven't really had a lot of time to do too much on the operational side. So every time I've been training lately, it is not with those 2 new toys. So I'm really interested into putting them to the test. So I've got a new 11.5 from BCM that I really want to kind of put to the test. And then I've got the SIG Spear. I kind of want to get at least 1,000 rounds through that, kind of see where it's going. New Huxwork can that I really want to see what my overall impressions are. But the ones I've shot in the past, I've been pretty happy with, especially the blowback issue.
Yep.
But
That
pistols,
flow through technology.
well, it is what it is, and I think Huxworks makes a good product. But I also look at them as another good example of a company that kind of saw the writing on the wall. And if you look at almost every single federal contract now, if it's for cans, it's all about flow through because they want less blowback. And it's a smart way to go. And if you look at what SIG is doing, if you look at what Surefire is doing, every single can they're building now,
They're all going that way.
they have a flow through
Yeah.
option. I mean, think of it this way. How much toxic gas are you getting back in your face with a normal baffle system? I mean, I still shoot normal baffle systems.
I was going to say, all of mine are. I still
Yeah.
just deal with it.
But I think for the future, most companies are going to kind of move over to a flow through or something similar. But yeah, the only thing I can say right now is if I'm going to be doing something like an end of the world style rifle, 14.5 regular AR system, I prefer a mid-length, but a carbine length is fine. LPVO with some type of red dot option on it. IR laser, AWLS. I know a lot of people will be like, oh, that's favoritism. No, there's a reason I like the AWLS.
There is, but it's also an awesome light.
Yeah, it's dual redundancy. You've got basically your ODA. If you don't like the ODA, that's fine. You can just use the pressure button. And if you don't like the way that the body system is, the head's a great system. You can throw it on a different body. You can use a different activating system. I know the Unity mounts or the Unity system does a really good job on that wattage voltage conversion, so you can get pretty much close to full capacity on the light. So it's there. Then you've got, as far as slings go, as long as it's not a Magpul, sorry Magpul, I like everything else you do, but that sling is horrendous.
Ask about a gun, you go down every aspect of gear you can rattle off.
Well, I mean, for me, a sling is really important. Like comfort, if you've got to carry that, I mean, anytime you've got something that weighs more than a pound on you, that starts to really add up over a short period of time, especially if you're covering distance. Even if it's just sitting on a range all day, like a really good sling, it needs to have padding. It needs to have an easy way in which you can actually adjust, tighten, loosen up. For me, the Magpul sling just doesn't do it. But as far as like
You and I go round
everything
and round
else
on
they're
slings.
doing, but I'll just say this: everything else they're doing, I really enjoy. Like they have some of the best stocks on the market. Magazines, that's all I use. Pistol grips, they do a great job on their pistol grips. And I'm glad to see companies like Magpul because to me, they're kind of an inspiration. You've got this, knuckle dragging jarhead that basically started doing stuff to outfit his unit and that's where you got the Ranger plates from. And then all of a sudden, he was like, wait a minute, I can turn this into a business. And that's what they did. And for me, that's inspirational.
That's what we all want to do. We all want to take a passion and turn it into something that's successful, but it's also benefiting, other folks out there.
But also look at it on the opposite side. There's a lot of people who have great ideas, but then they lack in a few small areas. Like, do they have the discipline to keep continuing on in the face of adversity? Like, you get to somebody who hears one thing negative about what they're building, and then all of a sudden they let all that negativity get in their head, and then all of a sudden they kind of drop out and they just stop doing it. And then you've got the unfortunate side of others, which is they just don't have the capital to really get that off the ground. And nobody really wants to talk about the capital component. And if you go back to HRT.
It's not just getting it off the ground, it's the marketing to keep it going.
Yeah, and that's always the hardest part, because you continually have to be creating relationships. And in today's current setup, if you're not working or working through other companies that are kind of aligned with you, it's hard to really get your stuff out there.
I was going to say, I don't have any other crazy questions. I don't know if you've got any off the cuff real quick. Otherwise, I figure we probably ought to just kind of wrap up this intro episode that went down everything from previous wartime engagements and then all the way up to future products that we're working on. So
yeah, and I mean, I think maybe shortly, once we start to get new products to the market, this would be a good platform for us to kind of discuss, even possibly looking at the design components of it. You and I sit down and maybe kind of discuss and kind of explain why the product was made, what changes, what influenced it, and then, hopefully get the word out about whatever new options we have out there.
Here's why we made it. Here was the thought process behind it. But then we'll probably get the feedback of, that's great. Here's what I'm actually using it for. Damn, that's a really good idea.
Well, then we can make changes, and then you can create something that fits that other mission that could be specific, because sometimes one product works really well for it, but then there's a better market by just making a few changes to it, making it bigger. So there's a lot of things that you can do. So
we'll see where we go with it in the future. All right, guys. Well, this is kind of who your hosts are going to be for this entire series. Hope you enjoyed at least a little bit of the background and the history of it. Like, follow, subscribe. Little snippets from this is going to be showing up on Instagram and some of the other socials. So get out there, let us know, comments. If there's any companies or influencers or anything that you guys really want to see, let us know. Cheers.